High above the forest floor, in the shadowed, interlocking branches of the ancient Ethelgard woods, hung a small, tightly sealed pinecone named Ignis. Unlike the broad leaves of the oaks or the delicate needles of the larch, Ignis was encased in a shell of impenetrable resin, thick and hardened by years of cold wind. He clung to the outer limb of a towering lodgepole pine, surrounded by hundreds of his brethren. For as long as Ignis could remember, this was existence. Dangling in the biting frost of winter and baking in the dappled sunlight of summer, swaying rhythmically with the wind but never truly moving. The older cones, weathered and graying, spoke of the branch as the ultimate sanctuary. "Do not let go," whispered a gnarled cone named Silas, whose scales were chipped from hail. "Below us is the great void. The forest floor is a graveyard of rot and shadow. Down there you are forgotten. Up here we are safe. Up here we endure." But Ignis felt a strange, restless energy pulsing deep within his tightly bound core. Enduring was not enough. He looked at the massive trunk of his mother tree, marveling at the strength it took to hold up the sky. He looked at the birds that nested in the branches, living lives of movement and song. He felt trapped within his own armor. His resin shell, designed to protect him, felt like a prison. He would often speak to the wind that rustled through the needles. "Is this all I am meant to be?" Ignis would ask. "A dormant vessel, waiting for a tomorrow that never arrives?" The wind would only sigh in response, carrying away the dust of the forest. Ignis knew that to remain on the branch meant safety, but it also meant a slow, uneventful fade into oblivion. He harbored a silent, terrifying wish: he wanted to fall. He wanted to see what lay beneath the mist that blanketed the earth, even if it meant facing the graveyard Silas so feared. He did not want to merely exist. He wanted to live, even if living meant risking everything. The change Ignis subconsciously craved did not come gently. It arrived in the dead of autumn, heralded by a sky that bruised a violent, stormy purple. The air grew heavy, smelling of ozone and crushed leaves. Then the tempest struck. The wind, usually a playful companion, turned into a roaring beast that tore through the Ethelgard woods, snapping branches and uprooting deadwood. The mother tree swayed violently, groaning under the immense pressure of the gale. "Hold fast!" Silas cried out over the deafening roar of the storm. "Cling to the bark! Do not let the wind take you!" Ignis tried to hold on, but a sudden, vicious downdraft slammed into their branch. He heard a sharp, sickening crack. The small twig connecting him to his lifelong home splintered. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Ignis looked back at the terrified faces of the other cones, and then, gravity took him. He plummeted into the terrifying unknown. The descent was a blur of whipping needles, flashing lightning, and the dizzying rush of empty air. He struck the ground with a bone-jarring thud, the impact sending shockwaves through his armored shell. He bounced off an exposed root, rolled through a patch of wet moss, and finally settled in a deep, muddy crevice. Before he could even process the fall, a deluge of icy rain began to pour. The storm washed down a miniature avalanche of dead leaves, heavy mud, and decaying bark, burying Ignis completely. The dim light of the forest was snuffed out entirely. He was encased in total, suffocating darkness. The air grew dense and foul, smelling of wet earth and slow decay. Silas had been right. The forest floor was a terrifying abyss. Days bled into weeks, though Ignis could no longer track the sun. The dampness of the earth seeped into the outer ridges of his shell. The mud was heavy, pressing down on him from all sides like a crushing weight. He was paralyzed, unable to move a fraction of an inch. In the pitch black, he began to hear the whispers of the soil. "Give in," murmured a decaying acorn lying just inches away, its voice soft and mushy. "The earth reclaims us all. There is no use fighting the rot. Let the moisture soften your resolve. It is much easier to simply dissolve and become food for the moss." "I am cold," another voice rasped, a fallen branch half-eaten by fungi. "I was once part of the great canopy, but now I am just a feast for the beetles. Surrender to the darkness, little cone." It is the fate of all who fall. Panic gnawed at the edges of Ignis's consciousness. He could feel the cold, clammy hands of the damp earth trying to pry open his scales, inviting the rot inside. He felt his energy waning, his spirit dimming in the oppressive dark. Was this the end? Was his grand desire for life meant to conclude in a muddy trench, slowly wasting away into nothingness? No, Ignis thought, marshalling every ounce of willpower he possessed. I refuse. I did not fall from the sky just to be swallowed by the mud. I am not a dead branch. I am not an empty shell. He squeezed his core tighter, focusing on the tiny, latent spark of life hidden deep within his center. He locked his resin armor, denying the moisture entry. He would not rot. He would wait. He would endure the burial not as a corpse, but as a sleeper waiting for the dawn. Months passed. The crushing weight of the soil became the new normal, but Ignis's internal monologue kept him sane. He spent his time in the dark visualizing the canopy he had left behind. He remembered the feeling of the sun, the vastness of the sky, and the towering strength of his mother tree. He realized something profound in the silence of his muddy tomb. The tree had grown from the earth. The very dirt that was currently suffocating him was the same foundation that held up the giants of the forest. This is not a grave, Ignis whispered into the darkness, addressing the decaying voices around him. This is a womb. You are delusional, the mushy acorn retorted weakly. You are locked in a shell of stone. You will never see the light again. My shell is my protection, Ignis replied, his voice vibrating with a new, strange confidence. It keeps the rot out. It preserves what matters. But even as he said it, a startling realization hit him. His shell was too strong. The very resin that saved him from rotting in the damp earth was also trapping him inside. No amount of water or rich soil could penetrate it to wake the seed within. He was in a stalemate with life. He needed a key to unlock his armor, a force powerful enough to break his hardened defenses, but he did not know what that force could possibly be. He only knew that he had to stay ready. He gathered his internal energy, holding his breath, waiting for a catalyst that he could neither name nor imagine. Summer arrived with a brutal, unrelenting heat that baked the Ethelgard woods. The rains stopped entirely. Above ground, the moss dried to dust, and the fallen leaves became brittle and curled. Deep beneath the surface, Ignis felt the mud around him harden into a cracked, dry clay. Then, one afternoon, the air above ground shifted. The smell of decay was suddenly overwhelmed by a sharp, acrid scent that stung the senses. Smoke. A dry lightning strike had ignited the forest miles away, and the wind was driving a wall of fire through the woods. The heat seeped down through the soil, raising the temperature in Ignis's underground chamber. The ambient warmth quickly escalated into an oppressive, terrifying inferno. It's the end! Screamed the rotting branch nearby. The sky is falling, the earth is burning. We are all turning to ash. The heat became agonizing. The soil around Ignis felt like a furnace. He could hear the roaring of the flames above, a deafening sound like 1,000 angry beasts devouring the trees. The terror in the earth was palpable. The insects fled, the roots shriveled, and the decaying matter around him was instantly vaporized. Ignis felt the intense, blistering heat wrap around his hardened shell. It was a pain unlike anything he had ever experienced, a searing, suffocating torment that threatened to boil him alive. He thought of giving up, of just letting the fire consume him and end the misery. The trial was too great. Just as the agony reached a breaking point, a miraculous thing began to happen. The thick, impenetrable resin that had sealed Ignis shut for his entire life, the armor that resisted the storm, the mud, and the rot, began to weep. The intense, deadly heat of the forest fire was exactly what it was designed for. The resin melted, turning from a rock-hard seal into a liquid that slipped away into the baking earth. Ah! Ignis cried out. The pain of the heat was still there, but it was accompanied by an incredible, violent release of pressure. As the resin melted away, the scales of his cone, locked tight for years, finally snapped open. Crack. The sound was small beneath the roar of the fire, but to Ignis, it was the loudest noise in the universe. Crack. Crack. One by one, the wooden scales flared outward. He was exposing his soft, vulnerable core to the searing heat of the earth, a terrifying leap of faith. The fire roared just inches above him, but instead of turning him to ash, the heat acted as a brutal, necessary awakening. I am breaking apart, Ignis thought, fear and ecstasy warring within him. I am being destroyed. But in that destruction lay his salvation. The very force that was annihilating the forest floor was liberating him from his prison. He wasn't being destroyed, he was being unmade so that he could be rebuilt. He thrust his delicate seed heart into the baking soil, anchoring himself just as the fire swept past, leaving behind a profound, smoldering silence. When the heat finally receded, the Ethelgard woods were unrecognizable. The dense, choking underbrush was gone, reduced to a thick layer of fine, gray ash. The towering canopy that once blocked the sky was charred and thinned, allowing brilliant, unobstructed sunlight to hit the forest floor for the first time in centuries. Beneath the ash, Ignis stirred. He was no longer a dormant seed trapped in a cone. He had become a delicate, pale green root. The earth, sterilized by the fire and enriched by the ash of his fallen neighbors, was now a feast of nutrients. A few days later, a gentle, forgiving rain began to fall. It washed through the ash, carrying the rich minerals straight down to Ignis's waiting roots. He drank deeply, feeling a surge of unimaginable power coursing through his new, fragile form. With a mighty, concentrated effort, he pushed upward. He navigated through the cracked clay, through the layer of wet ash, until finally, he broke the surface. For the first time in his existence, Ignis felt the direct warmth of the sun on his tiny green shoot. He opened a pair of soft, needle-like cotyledons, spreading them wide to catch the light. The breeze, no longer a terrifying gale but a gentle caress, brushed past him. "Hello, little one," the wind whispered. "You survived the fire." "I didn't just survive," Ignis replied, his voice small but vibrating with life. "The fire set me free." The emergence was only the beginning. Life above ground was a constant, grueling battle. As a tender sapling, Ignis was highly vulnerable. The first winter brought deep snows that threatened to snap his fragile stem. He learned to bend with the weight, bowing low to the ground but refusing to break, remembering the resilience he had forged in the dark mud. In the spring, hungry deer roamed the clearing, grazing on the new growth. Ignis focused his energy on growing sharp, bitter needles, protecting his vital core just as his old resin shell once had. He faced droughts where he had to plunge his taproot deeper into the earth, searching for hidden reservoirs of water, remembering the lessons of patience from his time underground. He struck up a friendship with the soil beneath him. "You are hard work," Ignis would say, straining to push his roots through a layer of rocky earth. "I am resistance," the earth replied in its deep, rumbling voice. "Without my resistance, your roots would be weak, and the first strong wind would topple you. Push harder. Earn your place in the sky." And so, Ignis pushed. He used every hardship, every biting frost, every dry spell, every howling storm, as a reason to grow thicker bark and deeper roots. He understood now that comfort was the enemy of growth. The easy life on the high branch would have left him weak. The brutal trials of the forest floor were forging him into a giant. Decades flowed like the sap in his veins. The tiny green shoot that had pushed through the ash was now a magnificent, towering lodgepole pine. His trunk was massive, covered in thick, furrowed bark that could withstand the scraping of bare claws and the sting of ice storms. His branches stretched wide, forming a new canopy that cast a protective shade over the forest floor. Ignis had achieved his dream. He was no longer the dormant spectator of life, he was a pillar of the forest. Birds built intricate nests in his boughs, raising their young safely hidden among his needles. Squirrels raced up and down his trunk, and moss blanketed his exposed roots, finding shelter from the harsh sun. He realized that his grand transformation wasn't just about his own survival, or his own glory. His struggle, his pain, and his growth had all been for a higher purpose, to become a sanctuary for others. The strength he had drawn from the earth and the fire was now being returned to the forest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of fiery orange and deep violet, Ignis felt a familiar rumble in the earth. A young sapling, struggling to push through the dry dirt near his roots, let out a tiny cry of despair. "It's too hard," the sapling wept. "The ground is too tough. I can't break through." Ignis rustled his massive branches, sending a comforting shower of dew down to the struggling plant. "Do not fear the struggle, little one," Ignis rumbled gently. "The hardest ground makes the strongest roots. Keep pushing. The sun is waiting for you." As the years rolled on, Ignis began to produce his own cones. They grew tight and armored, sealed with the same thick resin that had once enclosed him. He held them firmly on his branches, shielding them from the harshest winds, but he knew he could not hold them forever. He spoke to them often, sharing the wisdom of his long, arduous journey. "You are safe here," he would tell his cones, "but you are not meant to stay here. Within you is the blueprint of a giant. But to unlock it, you must be willing to fall. But the fall is terrifying." A young cone named Ember replied, her voice shaking. "And the elders say the earth is full of rot. The earth is full of challenges," Ignis corrected. "You will be buried in darkness. You will feel the sting of the rot and the terrifying heat of the fire. You will feel as though you are breaking apart. But remember this, change is not your end, it is your beginning. Every storm that tries to destroy you, every fire that tries to consume you, is the very force that will help you rise." When the next great autumn storm arrived, Ignis did not hold tightly to his branches. He let the wind take his cones, watching proudly as they plummeted into the dark, damp earth below. He knew the trials they would face, but he also knew their potential. He had achieved true immortality. Not by living forever, but by passing on the courage to break the shell, endure the fire, and bloom again.